Always a jazzy entrance on that one. Anyway, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is John Hildebrand, Principal Technologist at Cohesity, and you're listening and watching our latest episode of the Cohesity View, where we hear our principal technologists here at Cohesity like to discuss the current news and happenings in the tech industry and offer up our opinions on those sorts of things. I've got a couple of esteemed guests joining me today, and I'll have them introduce themselves here now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Miller. I am the Director of Technology Advocacy, and we have quite the lineup today, so I'm excited. Glad to be here.
And hello, everybody. My name is Vic Camacho. I'm also a principal technologist on the technical advocacy team, and I'm looking forward to the show.
All right. So, without further ado, let's get into our topics that we've selected. Um, I brought up ransomware again. I know we're beating it like a drum at this particular point, but it's prevalent. It's out there. Everybody's having to deal with it. In this particular case, unfortunately, it brought the worst to a historically black college and university in Illinois, a 157-year-old college, Lincoln College in Illinois, had to shutter its doors after this particular ransomware attack because it basically crippled them financially. And combined with the COVID pandemic and dwindling attendees for the college itself, but it was a double whammy for a college that had gone through quite a bit in its 157-year history, especially getting through things like the Spanish flu and the Great Depression. It was amazing that the university was able to get through even that at that point. And basically, COVID and a ransomware attack took it out. So I guess this is just another prime example of what could potentially happen on a worst case, even if you do pay the ransom at this point.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And they did take the time to pay the ransom, and it didn't save them or allow them to be able to come back from this issue. And it's interesting because ransomware, when you pay the ransom, an analogy that I heard that really resonated with me revolved around the fact that they'll send you a box of keys and a box of locks, and you have to figure out what goes to what when it comes to recovering those servers. So I suspect that was a huge element here, as they possibly couldn't even get that alignment to work out in time to save their business.
Yeah, and you make the point of not knowing which keys go to which data, right? And that's essentially what an effective KMS or key management server does for you, right? It matches your data with a certain key. And so they're not giving you that part of it. They're just giving you a bunch of keys. And at that point, it becomes trial and error. And so when you're trying to recover, uh, you know, quickly, it's not something that can happen because you have to trial and error every key until it unlocks the data. Now, if you have a small environment, it may not take as long, but if you have a large environment and you have to check every single server or every single file, that is going to take a long time. And even if you have spreadsheets to do this, you still have to trial and error every single one until you get to the right one.
Well, let's also not discount the fact that when it comes to a lot of universities, whether large or small, I mean, I worked for my university's IT department while I was a student there, and we did a lot of things on shoestring budgets. So we're talking about a organization that may not necessarily be equipped to handle an attack like this, even if you pay the ransom. There may not be enough hands to be able to help in regards to being able to bring and recover things back from basically this worst case scenario that they got hit with, even after paying the money in question, and still trying to do the trial and error to get things back up and going. They weren't able to get apparently the systems back up so that they could do registration for the next year. So this is something that I think we're probably going to hear more and more about, is the fact that when these smaller universities, small to medium sized businesses that may not necessarily be equipped for their IT staff to work with these particular scenarios. I, this might be just the beginning of hearing these particular stories about businesses, and even in this case, this historically black college and university having to shutter its doors because it can no longer function as a business because of the outcomes of a ransomware attack.
Yeah, and Teresa had mentioned this, right? Where they're paying the ransom, some of these organizations, and the DOJ, right, the Department of Justice, they've already deemed this kind of these cyber attacks as terrorism or cyber terrorism. And so, as you know, the United States, we don't negotiate with terrorists, and so the recommended steps to take is to contact the local authorities, in this case the FBI, so they'll come in and help you, but they're not going to advocate for paying the ransom, right? Because all this does is it enables these cyber criminals to it emboldens them to go and try again because they've had some success, and now they are advocating the same for others to do that. So it's been classified as cyber terrorism, and so you have to think about it in those terms now. And so again, putting these simple checks and balances, I call them that, in place will go a long way into avoiding some of these attacks.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that having a really good plan, like step back, take this as an example for your organization and look at what you are doing. And hopefully, what you find is that you can improve your security posture just by even something as simple as having a great backup and tested recovery strategy in place. Now, we've also heard stories where backups have been affected by ransomware. And so making sure that data is worm locked or air gapped, having multiple copies of data. Simple things like this don't have to cost a lot of money, but can get you a long way. If you couldn't prevent the ransomware from attacking your data, having a great data recovery strategy could be the only way of survival.
Well, there is a reason that the 3-2-1 rule is called a rule in the first place. It's not a theory. It's not a myth at this particular point. It's a rule. So whether you're a small business or a large business, you got to follow the rules in this case. And those have been adopted universally across the board. And if you don't adopt it, I'd hate to say if hope isn't a strategy in this case, and you had better have ways to protect your business. And in this case, it's showing that regardless of whether or not you pay or do negotiate with the terrorists in this regard, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up basically recovering the rest of your basically esteem or your reputation out there as being a valid business in this particular case. Because if you're not following these rules, you're running the risk at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at it in those terms, whether it's higher education, retail, manufacturing, financial markets, all these businesses, they need to practice sound judgment, right? I think it just comes down to mitigating risk wherever and whenever you can. And cybersecurity has always been one of those things that it's thought about, but kind of gets put on the back burner because, as you know, businesses are all about being quick, being nimble, being, agile. And now you're starting to see this element, of cybersecurity being brought to the forefront now because of ransomware, malware, because it's affecting revenue, the bottom line, and it's affecting folks at the top, right? Senior IT leadership. It's unfortunate that it's become a knee-jerk reaction, but it's good that we're starting to talk about it now, right? I think we're putting the horse in front of the cart now, where we have this box that we're supposed to operate from within, as opposed to trying to wrap around something that may be spread all over the place now. And so I think that's an important thing to realize, is that doing those things today will help you mitigate a lot of that risk. And if you do have those things in place, then those cyber criminals are going to go look elsewhere, right? Because they're going to try to attack those easy targets. Don't make yourself an easy target.
All right. Well, I think, we're going to transition to another topic. Is I think, again, we've discussed ransomware ad nauseum when it comes to a lot of things. And as Vic said, it's now a boardroom discussion. So everybody's talking about it all the way up to the top. But with that, Teresa, I hear you got a topic for us as well.
Yeah, mine is very people focused. So what we're seeing more and more is that events are back. As we speak now, there's KubeCon going on over in Europe. And if I just scan social media, it's more than that. I see people getting together all the time now. And so that's exciting in itself. Um, but I guess I'm just kind of wondering, are people really going to be going to everything? So while there's a lot going on right now, do you think that that the events are here to stay long term, or are there some challenges that we might be faced with here in the future?
I'll, I'll say this. I think it's kind of been this evolution of where we're at with everything, right? After the lockdowns, a lot of people were talking about, well, we can't wait to get back. And then certain things started to open up, and then we came back to a lockdown because people, you saw these cases elevate, with COVID. But I think now we're at a point where there's, the vaccines are out and all of that is kind of lifted this pressure off of everybody, right? Because I think it was a little bit of a fear factor. I know it certainly was for me because I have people around me that, I need to be able to protect. And I don't want to be that person that infected somebody. So I think where we're at today, people are even more excited. And you see these events, and you see concerts now and these big festivals happening. I'm looking forward to going and spending time with people again. I do miss that people element of it. I think that's the reason a lot of us go there. We go there to learn and to present and all of these things, but we also go to see these people that we don't get to see because they live globally. They live everywhere, and that's kind of like our place where everybody can commune together. And I think that's fun. I think people are looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think we're doing all right in the forms of where we're at with trying to manage COVID, even though numbers are spiking again with new variants new variants of variants that keep coming out. So we're doing our best at this point. I mean, I know from my perspective, I'll probably still do as much of the social distancing as I can. I'll try to be as safe as I can because I don't want to bring anything back home. But, it's one of these things where it's nice that we're got opportunities to get out and see people again, even if it's in smaller fashions and the events may not be as large as they used to be. I mean, we start to think of some of the events that we're going to try to go to, and the in-person size is reduced, but still a pretty significant number for us to be able to interact with. So we'll still be able to see people, interact with people, give them. I don't know if you're still doing the elbow bumps or anything like that, but we'll do what we can to make it as safe as possible.
One of the things that I think is pretty interesting is we keep talking about these events now being hybrid. So there's a mixture of recorded and in person. But think back for a minute. I'm going to just put on a little bit of a devil's advocate hat here. Think back. There was always a recorded option or recorded track previously. It wasn't real time. And I think maybe that's one of the differences. But perhaps we shouldn't be thinking of this as that much different from the past, because you could attend remotely and catch most sessions, depending on the event, virtually anyways. Maybe it'll just be more common now. Not every event did it. Not every event did it for every track, but it did exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think so. Maybe people just want airline miles again. I don't know. Being a little facetious there, but I mean, I think given that there are so many people that attend these, I think there's going to be a broad spectrum of people that are there and how they feel. And so I think as long as we're sensitive to that, right? Because everybody has a different background, everybody has a different experience with it. I think we just need to be, kinder, gentler, and just be very receptive to other people around us, right? It's just not us, right? There's other people, and in this awesome community that we have, I think understands that, and that's what I like about what we do and the people that we interact with is they tend to be a little bit, I'll call them more level-headed, and so that helps me open up a little bit more as well.
Yeah, and I'll go on record and state that it's nice that this is returning to, well, our jobs at this point, because I've, as much as I like this office and I like this chair and I like staring at this microphone and at this particular camera, I would much rather do this in person with somebody. And the fact that we're getting closer and closer to these sorts of things is reinvigorating to some degree. And it's giving me a little bit of an excitement that I haven't had for the last 2+ years as we've been sitting in our own, basically, protection bubbles at this point to try to keep ourselves from either catching or distributing disease at this. So I'm excited that this portion of my job is returning at this point, and we'll see how this next block goes with the trade shows, especially with so many sandwiched next to each other at this point. That might be a little taxing, and a few of us will get bored of some of the cities that we're going to be going to. But it'll we're back at this point.
We're
It's
back,
so
baby.
true. And John, you got me just reminiscing a little bit about the EUC Masters retreat that we were at in April. And Vic, you too, you mentioned the people side of this. So EUC Masters retreat was a smaller event. John and I were privileged to attend, Cohesity sponsored. And we really got to sit down and be with people. We got to podcast in person, which was actually a lot easier. It's easier to cue off of people when you're sitting around the same table.
Mhm.
But we also got to feel how much people care about each other. Like a lot of the topics for what normally would have been a super technical event revolved around talking about stress management or mental health or, things that were more people focused. Even re-entering. I know we spoke, we actually did a podcast with Esther Bartel and Ruben Sprite where we did a mental health topic. And one of Esther's challenges was re-entering, being around people again. And what that felt like was a little bit of a challenge. So if anyone didn't catch the podcast, we definitely suggest you check out On the Line with Cohesity. That was part 1 of the podcast. But I'm really curious to see what if this is true of all in-person events going forward. Like we're there to learn and learn about the tech, but is the people side of it just going to be more enhanced than ever?
That's a good question. I'm just looking forward to those people that show up in the hamster wheels to be there but not be there. Anyhow,
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to, well, if I'm doing handshakes, it'll be with hand sanitizer. But like I said, elbow bumps with people, just seeing people in the same room again. I may not necessarily enjoy the flying around in a tin can, but we'll, it's travel can be fun, but it can also be, a bit of a challenge at the same time. So we'll see. We'll ultimately see how this goes and whether or not this trend continues. But for the time being, well, we're back in this case. All right. Well, Vic, transitioning here, I hear you've got a topic for us as well.
yes. Mine's is artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? So there's just, you hear it, it's everywhere. People are starting to utilize it more in their tech, right? They are trying to bring an element of removing human error, right? Because we're humans, we're just prone to error, and that's never going to change. There's going to be accidents, there's going to be mistakes. And so, how do you minimize that, especially given the fact that some of these large breaches are accidental? They're not malicious at all, right? They are the product of something accidentally happening, whether it's through you know some task an admin is doing, or just a user accidentally clicking on a link before realizing they should have checked what the link was first. And so using AI and ML is a great way of minimizing that kind of risk. And if you haven't noticed that I'm all about mitigating risk wherever, it's been what I've been doing for my focus for the last 5-6 years now. But in talking about AI and ML, there's that other part that, it can be great. It can certainly be great, right? It's going to help you detect anomalous behavior, alert you to certain things that may be going sideways in the environment, and so you can go check those things out. But I'm also looking at it from, well, how do you protect ML and AI from being compromised? Because that can have, that could be really bad. Again, it still requires a little bit of human interaction to set those things up. And then once they're set up, it learns. But how do you keep that from being compromised? And so I got the chance to attend a conference right before the whole COVID lockdown. So I did. And one of those conferences was around physical security. So it was things like body cams, like the law enforcement wears and the military wears. And so they're leveraging and utilizing a lot of AI and ML there, right? A lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence. And so a couple of the things that I saw, they were pretty cool, right? We're at a point where we have drones that are going after other drones. No, they're not manned drones. They're just these super these big drones, right? And so one of the limitations of these drones is that there's a limited battery life on it, right? And so they've created a drone that has this long tethered cable, and it goes straight up. And its sole purpose is to look for other drones with this super high caliber camera. And so if it finds something, and then you can't see it with the naked eye, but this drone can detect things. And so if it sees an enemy drone or something it recognizes as an enemy drone, there's these smaller drones that come off of it and go after this drone. So that's where we're at today. We are effectively going after somebody else's drones. And so what it does is it gets to it and it casts the net over it, and it falls to the ground, right? And so that's a win for whoever owns that drone, I guess. But the other one was, these drones that are being used for surveillance, or being used for hunting targets, things of that nature. But I always go back to having effective zero trust, right? Because if those credentials are compromised, that's very alarming to me, because that means that if somebody else gets, you see these in the movies too, like, oh, somebody has access to our drone. And so that can actually happen today. And so just keeping that in mind is having effective zero trust, multi-factor authentication, role-based access control, so that things of this nature can be limited. But I'd be interested if anybody has thoughts on this, because for me, it's about mitigating risk, and that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, so some of what you shared is really thought-provoking and could be scary, right? Especially when we start talking military and controlling drones that might actually have surveillance over something that's highly confidential. We don't want that risk. But I want to kind of flip it to thinking about AI/ML from a healthcare perspective, for example, where it's being used to help supplement what people really aren't capable of processing. So when you consider what they're doing around some of, I don't know if I'm going to say it right, but like the not maybe genetics or geo something, right? I don't know if I've got that right, but But like on the, we'll say, genetic research side of things,
Mhm.
um, there could be some pretty large leaps in understanding just because the level of processing can be just so much quicker. So I think AIML has its benefits for sure, but I think we have to tread carefully with it for many reasons, whether it's security risks or even just replacing what humans can do in general.
Yeah, and I worry a little bit because in most of these cases, AI algorithms and ML tend to learn from us as human beings, and if we're talking about human beings, we're flawed individuals. We have biases, we have all sorts of other things that basically impact our judgment at this point. So if those get built into AI algorithms and if they're learning from us, who knows what sort of biases we put into these particular algorithms and who knows what sort of returns we get out of those things. Because at the end of the day, we're seeing that more and more businesses are turning to AI and ML to be able to supplement workforces, to be able to improve efficiencies. They're not necessarily replacing workers, but they're basically changing the way that workers interact with the systems that they do their work in this case. So as an example, instead of using their own hands to grab a hold of something, like say if it's in a warehouse or something like that, something is being brought to you to be taken and put into a package at that point. So I've seen this a little bit at an Amazon facility where pickers, essentially they call them, do nothing more than are told this thing is coming. This particular package is going to be taking something from this particular bin, so grab it. The entire act of putting that into the bins and getting things available, that's all being done by machines at this point. So there's still so instead of you having to roam around a warehouse for logistics purposes, as an example, well, now all you have to do is do the last mile portion, which is putting it in a box and getting it ready for delivery at that point. So, but I do worry a little bit that there are things like bias that can be put into systems. We've already seen some examples of AI engines and Twitter bots and things like that have been backed by those sorts of things that then started spewing out some of the worst of humanity after they had been injected with the worst of humanity. So it's interesting to see where these sort of things can go to, especially knowing full well that if you're trying to reduce human error or just human interaction at that particular point, there are some things that we do that you do have to worry about that get injected into those systems, and I do worry a little bit about that.
I think overall, it's a good thing. Um, Removing errors, right? Things that could be accidental. I think that's great. And to Teresa's point, right, with the medical research, the processing power behind that is amazing. So it's going to move a lot more efficiently than a human could ever, right? And so I think leveraging that and with a little human interaction as they start to look at the data and that it would have taken us a lot longer is a great thing. So I'm right there with you, right? You make a great point about the human interaction and our biases. I think at some point, does it ever overtake those biases, right? Learning and being more logical than we are. So that's a great thing to keep in mind as well.
Yep. All right. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of this particular episode of the Cohesity View. If you have any comments or, well, concerns, let us know. Follow along on our YouTube channel. We continue to try to do these on a monthly cadence. So, and we're always looking for topics at the same time. So if you've got any topics you'd be interested in hearing more about from our opinions, let us know and comment along below with us in the YouTube comment section. And with that, I'm going to end us out. And you guys, thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Have a great day.